So thank you one more time for joining us. This time I decided to organize our event a bit different, using the opportunity that two of our Agile coaches from US, David and Daryl, are here tonight. We based our session today.
I'm sorry to interrupt again. Can we put the music on?
Yeah. Alright.
Barbara? So we decided that the session will make it a bit different. It will be based on your question and everything you'd like to hear from our Agile coaches. Also, I'd like to ask you to remain after the session for some drinks and networking. And just before you start, I want to just remind you that our next event is going to be on 23rd of October, introducing Julie. So I guess we are ready to start. David, Daryl?
Alright, so we're using this, actually let's see, maybe we need to refresh that. And then this will bring up the website that you might want to look at. Sorry about this. So this is the Ask Us Anything kind of session. We'll look forward to your questions, and we're going to see if we can get started. So someone put an adaptive there, and then you can moderate. So based on what comes up and what gets voted on, we're excited to answer your questions. While people are thinking of questions and putting them in, maybe I'll just introduce myself a little bit more. My name is Daryl. I'm an Agile coach with Vistaprint, based out of our Boston/Baltimore office. Been an Agile coach for a little over 5 years.
So I'm David Reichert, also based out of our Boston office. We've been at Vistaprint for about 7.5 years, and I've done coaching in some capacity for, I suppose, just 3 or 4.
All right, let's get started. Let's take a question. Let's just start with the top one. As they keep coming in here, let's start with.
I'll ask you. So, where have you seen teams struggle with Agile, Daryl?
That's a great. Quick question, David.
My teams never struggle with Agile.
I think where we've seen teams struggle with Agile is when we've gone in and we've tried to be more prescriptive about what it is that they should be doing. I think it can be pretty disruptive depending on how you do it. Our approach at Vistaprint has tended to be a more, we call it a values-based approach. And so we do a lot of education about like the Agile values and principles. And the concept we have come to use called value, flow, and quality, where we try to get people to understand that Agile is a means to this positive end that we're all trying to get to. It isn't an end in and of itself. So what is going to work for us in our complex system, we're going to have to discover. And that it's going to emerge from our own culture, from our own business environment, and that's what's going to work. So I think we've had a hard time doing that. Now I can layer in what even going down that path has been some of our challenges. So you can share a little bit, David, like if you've been going down this path, what have been some challenges going down the culture-based approach?
So maybe just thinking of challenges along the way of our Agile transformation. I think one of the things that's a real challenge for teams is when you start going down some of these paths, sometimes you'll uncover things that are painful or not working about your process. And that often will make teams push back against it. Like, oh no, see, this is so much worse. We found out that it takes 3 years to deliver a product to production. It's like, these are valuable things that we've discovered. So I think getting used to this idea that change requires some amount of friction. It's the rub that is what actually makes you adapt. And through that inspection and adaptation of the way that you work, that's the only way that you can really get better.
And honestly, I think that's a great point, which is it's not just the team, and it is their relationships with other parts of the organization. So whether it be their manager, and that relationship might change because of how Agile asks us to inspect and adapt to the way that we work, including that relationship, or how we work with a partner in another part of the organization. That's another often place that we see it, and that's part of it. And that's why, the overused phrase, but really is true, is that Agile is a journey, and that actually this you have to find the right balance of uncomfortable and sort of out of control. And I think that we have to have the right feedback loops to know when we've reached that point, and that's hard to figure out.
Can I ask you like directly, or should I mean, I want to follow up on what you said. So,
Yeah, please, no, sit down.
so you said that you try to teach the people or teams Scrum values. So how do you do that? May I ask? So you have developers everywhere and other stakeholders and business people, whoever is involved in the product creation. How do you teach them Scrum values?
Yeah, so since we start with what we refer to as a values-based approach, we actually have this curriculum that we've created for both new hires and anyone that wants it at any time that goes over 3 of our core values around value, flow, and quality. So we've really ensured that if there's any sort of pull or desire for education within the teams, we're making it readily available. We've actually created an entire portion of our organization known as the Agile Champions, who one of their main roles is to go out and sort of evangelize the values that we use within our organization, help teach teams that are getting started in these sort of spaces, and it also allows them to have additional facilitators for things that you'll typically see in Agile spaces, things like retrospectives. So right off the bat, we're really encouraging teams to inspect and adapt their processes, recognizing that growing over time is really essential to be successful in an Agile space.
I think that's complemented by some of our other values. We value the concept of servant leadership. So there is an entire curriculum for all of the sort of senior leaders within our organization, called the role of leader, which tries to get them to learn how to see that role a little bit differently than I think what we have been, at least in our company, more sort of a more command and control, or not command and control, but more like manager's director of work type of role versus like someone who supports the team and creates the environment that they need to succeed.
Yeah, in that same vein, we've also created other education for our leaders. One of them being called a Agile Leadership Pathway, which is designed to help leaders understand the things that they might see their teams doing. If you don't have the context, it can be really weird to see a team work with story maps or refer to things like cost of delay. And we're trying to really help them understand the value that they can see from using these approaches and the best way in order they can support their teams.
And they go under these training programs legally, or?
So, generally speaking, we really try and adopt what we refer to as a pull-based approach. So we're actively trying to not go out to the organization and say, you have to go through this particular class right now. I'd say maybe the only place that's a little bit different is going through our introduction to VFQ. That's just something that you do as soon as you want board. But even for follow-up classes or anything like that, you can pull for that at any time in our org.
And then the deeper learning tends to come from our coaching engagements. So when a team again pulls for it, it's like hey, I have this problem. I think you might be able to help. That's when we engage with the team and we work with them. We shadow. We learn a little bit about their context, and then we try to co-create a sort of a coaching engagement or coaching plan. It's and that might include education. It's we're having problems slicing our work, or we're having problems delivering value, on a quick cadence, or what is our challenges? How can you help us? Oftentimes, that coaching engagement will come with education that either we already have or we might craft, for them. All right, my turn to ask the other question. Where did your Agile journey begin, Dave?
So mine's a little bit interesting because in some ways it was a little bit happenstance. I was actually one of the lead engineers within CARE, and as we started our Agile transformation, we had started to adopt Scrum, and as part of it, we just needed someone to fulfill some of the roles of a Scrum Master. I had started to really get interested in this sort of work and started to increase the amount of time I was investing within Scrum Mastery. From there, I started to expand out into working with other teams, helping facilitate other people's ceremonies, doing little bits of education, and it just continued to progressively grow. I had the great fortune that Vistaprint was able to send me to several different trainings, one of which with Lisa Adkins and Michael Spade, which are really well known within our industry for being some of the best coaches. So getting to learn under them really helped accelerate my sort of my journey.
Hey, for me, my Agile journey, I'll go way back, and the way that I think about this is that I might sort of like when I talk about what my why is. My why is that I really am I'm passionate about helping people, and I'm deeply interested in complex adaptive systems. I studied science in college, and then I became an engineer. So trying to figure out like how to build systems that iterate but try to get better, that change their purpose, but adapt. That's just a fascinating topic for me. And then when I initially tried to solve problems within the computer science realm. But at some point, I realized that I was working for a company where it didn't work very well. Like it was very challenging to develop software there, and I started trying to find other ways of doing things that worked better. And this is what I found. That as I learned more and I've gone deeper down this path, I come to believe that it's sort of the worst of all ways of working, except for all the rest, kind of thing. Like it's just sort of the thing that I found that I think helps people grow the most and helps us solve problems in a better way. So I continue that path. I've been as a manager for a while, and then I had the opportunity with Vistaprint when we had started our Agile transformation, similar to David, to get trained as a coach.
So let's work from the top. What challenges have you faced in trying to apply the Agile values? None at all, right?
Yeah, no, it's easy. Isn't that everyone's experience? The challenge is that I think that the number one is that change is difficult. People don't necessarily want to change, and that becomes the start of every transformation, right? So within sort of a coaching stance, it's like you can't change anyone; they can only change themselves. And sort of coming from that point of view, what can you do? How can you create the right mirror for people to come to believe that there is a better way and that changing will help them? And I think the constant challenge of trying to find that right mirror in different situations continues to be one of the deepest challenges, I think.
I think for myself, the deepest challenge I've faced is how we actually use our values when things go wrong. I think that I've worked with a lot of teams that are great at actually applying their values until there's some sort of catastrophe, and that's really the worst time to fall back to old habits. So I think just creating that sort of mindfulness that if you value these sort of things at all other times, except for right now when something is on fire, let's examine what's going on here. Let's really try and continue to apply the values the same way that we would in a more calm and measured situation.
And similarly, like people, there are different ways that people approach problems, and not everyone wants to approach things through a values-based approach. So many people want to know, just give me the answer. I've heard we felt that way. Like, just show me how to do it. That's the way that a lot of people interact. Like, there's a solution. You have it. Why don't you tell me? Kind of thing. And that, I find that's a difficult thing to do, because then you have to start with we call it meeting them where they are and making them successful, giving them something, but trying to show them the path of there's actually a deeper purpose behind what you're doing, and to give them a little bit to keep going down that road.
I remember the first time I had worked with a coach, and I had been very frustrated that he just wouldn't tell me the answer. And I think what I much later learned was, even if he gave me the answer, it wouldn't have necessarily been correct. Like, ultimately, I'm the one that was closest to the work. I have the greatest understanding of the problem. And I'm the only one that's really going to be able to pick the right sort of solution, pick the right answer. Just giving someone an answer at best is going to be fantastically wrong. And at worst, that person isn't going to be able to have ownership over those decisions in the past. Like, we want them to be able to grow and to recognize that failure isn't a failure as long as you've learned along the way. Like, it's failure to learn that we should be actively scared of, not just failing to accomplish something.
All right, David, try this one on. Is Agile suitable for every kind and every size of team?
So I would give a caveated yes. There are certain situations in which Agile may not be needed. If you have complete and absolute certainty and you're maximizing for very specific things, Agile may not be the right set of values in that case. But I do fundamentally believe that there are far fewer of these very specific situations. I'm curious how you think about this one.
You know, as every person does, sometimes we hold differences. And sort of, this is a time that I'm going to hold the difference with David and say, my answer to this question is yes, and here's why. Is that one of the things that I think Agile tries to teach us is that apply what works in your situation to the problem that you have. Like, you have to apply a little bit of domain or a little bit of understanding to like what type of problem this is, and I should apply the right approach to solve this type of problem. We often use the kind of framework when we teach Agile values and principles, and I like that as a model. So whether you are in the simple, if you're in the complicated and complex, you're going to have different. If that's the problem you have, you should take a different approach to solve that. And I think Agile helps us sense what type of problem you have, and then figure out what is the right way to solve that problem. And that's why I feel like it covers.
So what's an experience that was foundational to your current understanding of Agile?
For me, one of my somewhere in the start of my coaching journey, I had an opportunity to be trained by a couple of coaches, Joshua Arnold and Özlem Yus, and we were learning about complexity. And I remember Joshua trying to explain to me like what that meant, and he said he related this anecdote, and it's really stuck with me, and I actually use it all the time. And he's like, the canonical example of complexity, is imagine the best party you've ever been to, and just have that in your mind. Like, just imagine the place that you were, the people you were with, and then imagine that you got together with the same people in the same place with the same food and everything else. You think you would have the same outcome? And the answer is no. Right? Because that's just the nature of how many interactions, how many variables you have, and it's because of that you can't know the outcome of that. And so when you lose that belief that you can predict what is going to happen based on your knowledge of the initial constraints or the initial conditions, I think that for me was I need to explore a different way to solve problems, and I need to find a different way of working that is going to help me, because I feel like more of my problems are that type. What about you, David?
So this will sound strange, but I would actually say one of the most formational sort of experiences for me was reading the book. Oh my gosh, what's the book called? Where is that?
Okay.
Yeah, no. The Contemporary book.
Oh, the art of tidying up. Is that?
Yeah, like magic of tidying, something like that. It's a book about cleaning your house. But I think that there's a lot of values in there that she's trying to establish that I really relate to. One of them, when I think to the principles itself, is this principle around simplicity. The art of maximizing what is not done is essential. When I had read through her book, I really took away this idea of focusing on just the things that provide value and nothing else. And when you take away all the other waste, all the other things that aren't adding value to your life, that's when you can really truly be happy. And that's how I think a lot about what Agile is doing. It's taking away the things that aren't providing value and giving you an opportunity to deeply introspect on what's actually improving the work you're doing, what's actually making you happier as you're either living your life, going to work, any of those sort of things. So it was a deeply introspective book for me. So actually, no, you should ask.
Oh, all right, sorry. For a new to Agile team, how do you motivate them to apply the methodology?
So in this case, in this case, do you really mean do you think we should talk to the values, or what do we mean by methodology?
I think it means, the Agile values. That's fine.
Yeah.
If you felt something different, like please say whoever
Yeah.
question.
I think one of the places that I like to start with is helping them understand what a value actually is. So we have this exercise where we will do something like ask people to share a story about something that really delights them, makes them happy, something like that. And we have their partner answer the question, what's something you think this person values? And it's really to recognize that values are these deep sort of things that we have, and they ultimately lead into our beliefs and our behaviors. They're the things that cause us to act in a certain way. I think by starting with this idea of what a value is, it becomes easier to show, I suppose, really show that having values doesn't mean you have to adopt new processes, have new roles, any of these things. It's really just taking different actions, behaving in a different way based off a set of values. So really just starting with that values-based approach. I suppose the other thing that's essential is to help teams understand why they would even want Agile. I think there's a lot of approaches to work out there that sort of can seem like a problem in search of a solution. And by starting with this belief that Agile is helping us get our best ideas to our customers sooner, that can be really attractive. Ultimately, I think most people want to do well by their customers. We want to delight the people that we're spending so much of our day-to-day producing something for.
For me, I think when I think about motivating a team, you always want to, if they want to change, I tend to apply one of the change models. I like Cotter, and like Cotter always says, like start with agreeing on what the problem is, or getting people to say that there's a problem. So if a team is new and wants to be motivated, I think I always try to start with, what pain do you have? Like, what do you want to be better? And I think if we agree on that, I feel like I can take them down a path, using the values and principles that will construct an experiment that will help them be better. Like, if I didn't believe that, I wouldn't believe in the values and principles. But I think if we agree on a problem statement, we can kind of get there. So for a new team that's new to this, that's where I like to start.
So is there a moment where waterfall is preferred over Agile?
All right, so this is where that earlier question, where I held a slight difference with David, is will come out. And so, in my definition of Agile is like nothing more, nothing less than these values, and it's not a particular framework or a particular approach to the problem. Waterfall I see as like a framework or an approach to a problem. That's fine, and it might be suitable for certain types of problems. Like if you are in the complicated domain or the simple domain, that could be appropriate for that. Like it's not, I don't have any sort of strong feeling. It's more when you use waterfall to solve complex problems that I feel like you're in the wrong space. And you're like, this approach, like where you're going to plan and you feel like you can predict, and that is going to lead to the outcome you want, like that's where that really falls down. It's like, we talk about waterfall as an outgrowth of Taylorism and scientific management, and like that was like this prevailing theory about like, how to work together. And that was just only one tool, and there's so many more rich ways to approach this, and it doesn't work for the complex problem domain. And so that's what I'm more interested in, is like find the right approach to solve the problem you have. What is your answer to that question?
I think mine is really going to be largely the same as that. I don't think we hold a difference in that particular aspect. All
right, David. Have you worked with on-premise solutions? How Agile different to cloud-hosted tools? So I think this is maybe, I believe it's a question about tooling for Agile teams. So
it's more about approach. There are different mechanics how software gets to customers when it's on-premise, and different when it comes to cloud.
For timing, when the product is on-premise.
Yes, and so yes.
I see.
Yes, I've developed software both on-premise in the cloud. I think in both cases, the way we approached it was very similar. I'd say the primary difference for on-premise solutions is we had to build a lot of the tooling ourselves to be able to rapidly release, rapidly test the things that we were producing. And that did require a lot of engineering approaches, because the tools we were using weren't actually designed for that. I remember at one time we had this is CRM, it's a customer relations management tooling, and one of the pieces of software that I had written was to constantly cycle these 36 machines, like every 20 minutes. That way I could constantly roll out new versions of our software without having to take downtime. I think really, whether you're working in the cloud or whether you're working in an on-premise sort of situation, there's always a way to work in that Agile sort of approach where you're constantly getting feedback, constantly trying to deliver value. Sometimes it just requires a different thought paradigm. Is that sort of help? Okay. Daryl's excited about this one. Do you use Agile at home?
Absolutely, but not because, but mainly almost not because of me. So I really believe in the ideas and the values. I just feel like they solve many problems wherever they are, at home or at work. They just apply to problems.
So I already have follow-up questions to this. How young is too young to start with Agile?
You're never too young. But so I've been trying for years for my wife to just adopt a very simple visualization tool, and she hated it. Like never worked with it. I can't coach my wife. That's beyond my skill. But she read a book about how to raise happy families, which was essentially Agile for families. And then it was literally, I think, quoting like the values and principles, and then she comes to me and she's like, these are some awesome ideas, like, we should totally do this, and she didn't believe them for me. So one of the things that we do is we have a family meeting on Sundays, which is essentially our weekly retro. So we get together, my kids and my wife, we say, we thank everyone, so we try to we say one thing that we're grateful to for every member of the family for the past week. We start with gratitude. Then we move on to what did we like, what happened well the week, what didn't go well in the week, and we write down a little action, like on a little note card over dinner. It's been interesting. Honestly, I feel like it's been great. Like we sometimes come up with very inane actions, like we have to stop using this comeback that we all like, and we've been overusing it, and everyone's tired of using this comeback, which is "so's your face," like no one likes that. We get tired of that one too. Actually, so I feel like some really interesting conversations that helped my kids sort of open up about things they didn't like. They were saying, like, you yell too much. Like, where would they have the opportunity to say to us, that they were dissatisfied with that sort of like, maybe we were on edge that week and we were raising it. So I really appreciated actually having that space, and them feeling comfortable enough to say, take it down, Mom and Dad. Like, this is, we don't like it.
if you'd like to learn more about Daryl's family retrospectives, it's like totally by chance this question came up. I've actually written an article on Daryl's family retrospectives, so if you're interested, we can let you know about that later.
You joined as Agile Coach, yeah?
Yeah, Daryl's adapting it. He just doesn't know it yet.
David, is there anything that you don't like about Agile?
Oh yes. But it's not Agile itself, it's actually the things around Agile. I think the certifications are terrible. I think that it's really challenging to understand whether these things are going to be legitimate when you go and take them, and I think it sets people up for failure in some ways. Because a lot of people will go and say, oh, I can take a 6-hour class and now I'm a Scrum Master. It's like, maybe you understand what Scrum sort of looks like, but it's very different to take a 6-hour class than to go and implement Scrum in your organization. I think that's the one thing that our industry as a whole needs to fix. How about you? Anything you don't like?
I don't know. I agree with you on your point. I think one thing that often happens with people that have good ideas sometimes is they get a little too sure of their good ideas. And I think when, just generally in the industry, like when I think it can be a little bit like this is the one true way type of thing. While I deeply believe in it, I recognize that other people might disagree with me, and I want to have that conversation. But I think when it gets to the point of more like you're saying you have to do it that way, rather than an invitation to learn more about a better way to do things, I feel like it's got wrong.
So what would you recommending for a person that's just starting their way in Agile?
What recommend for reading? Just starting their, what was the book that, when did you start? Actually, I'm having trouble answering that question. Okay,
well, because I get a quarter every time I plug it. I recommend the book Being Agile by Mario Moreira. He's a coach that I studied under. But in addition to Being Agile, which really is legitimately a good book, I actually recommend a servant leadership book as well, Turn the Ship Around. I think that what I like about that book is it helps, at least for me, give me a good framework for also helping other people understand why they may even want to be Agile and how to best serve those people as you're going through any type of transformation.
If you're just starting, then I might recommend one of sort of like, there are these like Agile like narrative storybooks that are out there. There are a couple, the Phoenix Project or Rolling Rocks Downhill, I think are really approachable ways to get introduced into the ideas of Agile. So yeah, I think it's a really approachable start. All right, David, can Agile methodologies be applied to governance, for example, politics, communities?
Yes.
Tell me more.
Actually, I don't know where to go with this one.
To be honest, like I haven't worked in that environment, but I've heard Jeff Sutherland talk enough, and at least Jeff will always say that at least in the United States, it's sort of actually mandated that government contractors follow Agile methodologies, and we can talk more about that sort of policy. But I think it has had successes within the government. I look at sort of government regulation, or like I have worked in far more with Agile, but when you're working with a lot of constraints and regulation, those are still, you recognize those as constraints and regulation, and then you accept that, and Agile values and principles can apply within that. Yes, you might wish that those constraints were different, but they exist for that, for that company or for that industry. But you can still find a way to be Agile within them. That's my belief.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm trying to ask a question for about 10 minutes now. And
Oh,
it just
sorry.
disappears all the
Go
time.
ahead. Yeah.
There are more people like me that are trying to ask questions, but the whole app doesn't really work. So.
Okay. Sorry, this isn't working.
I'm not showing all on the screen. If you need to submit them, if you want, I can show them all. Just have to wait to be answered.
I think
Because they
Let's just show them all.
okay.
That's our fault.
I thought
Using
we
these
did that.
Because also there's
No,
a
like, we did it, we were clear, we'll show them all and people can vote.
Okay.
Mine is still on there.
Yeah,
So,
so many more questions.
Please ask your question.
Me?
But yeah, go
all right. So
Yeah.
I was more interested about the organization. If you can simply describe your org chart and how did it evolve? How did it change over the years? Because you said you work at Vistaprint for 5 years, so or being Agile Coach at Vistaprint for 5 years. So I presume the transformation is going, or your journey is, for 5 years plus.
Yeah.
So you don't maybe nowadays really come across organizational obstacles and maybe some managers trying to look for their. Many people changed, and already new people came which already went through your program. So a lot of stuff has changed. So how does it look like now, and how did it look before? If you can comment.
Sure, I'll try to answer that question. So when we started Agile Coaches, we were, one of the reasons why we went this is that we were a very sort of like program management, very planning-oriented organization, and have the roles that supported that. And so as we have continued to change and evolve, those roles have changed. I'd say in general we have flattened the org structure, and the way that we think. So I think that's true. Like maybe the best way to say it is the ratio between managers and how many people per manager has gotten higher, and that is while we're also trying to provide services for every person, not only for the manager. So career coaching might come through, not only your manager, that might come through someone else, or mentorship through someone on your team, that kind of thing. So we try to find leaders all throughout the organization. So that's something that we try to find. And I'd say the other way that it's changed in sort of org structure, so while the org structure itself sort of by hierarchy is flattened, I'd say the meaningful way that we try to change is that I think recognizing that people play different roles kind of thing. So you might be like the executive in charge of marketing, but you'll lead sort of a cross-functional team that accomplishes an outcome, including other departments. So we do organize and recognize that people are going to play more than one role, and that org chart isn't the only way that we should think about who we should look to for leadership in terms to get work done.
Mm-hmm.
So we form other structures in addition to the sort of functional organizational ones.
Mm-hmm.
All right, David.
Yeah.
How do you help a team that is not functioning properly?
So I'm a big fan of trying to approach things from a systems point of view. I really want to work with a team to understand what's the systemic cause that's causing whatever problem that they're facing right now. So sometimes that just delves into understanding what's the problem that they perceive up at the service level, and then just continually digging down at each level, asking why this problem exists, why the next sort of challenge works its way down. Typically through solving a systemic problem, you can actually create a much wider impact across an entire team. One of my favorite stories that I like to tell is a approach that the team had implemented called stranger danger. So we had eventually gotten to this point that a lot of problems in this particular team were based on handoffs. So in order to try and minimize handoffs, they had come up with the rule that if you go and talk to anyone that is outside of the team, you have to bring another person. That was the only rule and the only change. And it had really been a night and day transformation, just bringing in this one little shift. The team was able to find that they were able to ask better questions when they went and spoke with other stakeholders because they had someone else that was bringing along some additional context. When they were engaging with other team members, that we'd actually gotten feedback that they preferred to interact with our team in this particular way because they were able to quickly get through the problem because there was much less of a, I need to go back and ask my team sort of mentality. And just the day-to-day handoffs, since people were staying or coming in and leaving at very different times of the day, just having more of that continuity through this one very basic rule create just a huge shift. We got that first one, right? So, yeah.
Yeah.
So I have some familiarity, but what's your opinion about the no estimates, friend Daryl?
I think you feel much more passionately about that one. I'm going to give that one to you.
So I will caveat this with I am still reading through no estimates right now. But I think what I've taken away from it is people frequently want to use estimates for not good reasons. And whenever a team wants to have, better estimation, better predictability, wants to have all these things, the thing I just want to ask is why? Like, it's fine to want more predictability. What are you going to do with that more predictability? What are you hoping to achieve? So to me, it's really the outcome that you're trying to seek through this sort of trend that's the important thing in my perspective.
I think what I've encountered at least no estimates is a very similar thing, which is estimation is a tool, and if you are achieving the outcomes of that tool with or without it, because maybe the nature of your work, that you're able to limit sort of the variability where you've achieved a certain level of predictability without it, like that, the outcome is what I see, not any particularly use of the tool. And so I ask a lot of questions to try and probe of how are the outcomes for your team? Like, are you sometimes estimates, hopefully they're used for your planning, so you make good decisions about what to do and when. And if you are making those decisions, and that's sort of, you show that through, delivering very regularly, then that's great. Then I don't have any issue. There are no problems with using a tool or not using a tool. But if you are having those problems, it might be a place to look and say, maybe this is a tool that will help us. So that's the ones I look at.
Did you say PI planning?
Did I say what?
Did you say PI planning?
PI planning. Oh, no, I didn't say PI planning. You know what that is, but I did not just say PI planning. All right, David. What is the best way to scale Agile?
Don't do it.
+1.
So something that we try to do in our organization is to get a greater tie of strategy to task. So for anything that we're really working on, to create a structure that's allowing the person doing the work to be able to tie that particular piece of work all the way up to the corporate strategy. And the way we do it is by actually having 6 primary outcomes that we're working in, and we organize all the work behind these this concept of rooms. But by really just creating that strategy to task sort of line, I suppose. We call them, what's the word? It's the
Measures of success?
no, it's the tree. I can't think of it.
I think the way that I think of it, or how we talk at both at Simpress level, so our parent company as well as us, is the way to scale is to decentralize and descale. Like, that is the way to get information to the people doing the work, that to make sure that they're working on the strategy and working and are clear about what that is, so that they can make the best decisions in order to move the company forward is the right way to do it. So creating structures that create as few intermediary structures as possible, and trying to figure out the right org structure and like the right way of relating to one another, that helps that, because that is, I think, the way to scale it. Just getting bigger, creating more middle layers isn't our approach to do it.
How would you convince managers to go Agile?
Having had this conversation multiple times, so like the way that we're actually very deeply influenced by the Lulu culture change model. So if you think about the colors, like orange, green and teal. So the Lulu culture model talks about there are various cultures that have evolved in the world, and that a lot of he assigns colors to them. And I'd say the predominant culture in business is this orange culture. We call it meritocracy, focus on metrics, focus on winning, focus on hierarchy. And when I try to convince a manager, I do try to figure out where they are in that, what is their sort of worldview, and then try to speak in their language. I think if I try to speak in a very sort of abstract, Agile way to someone who doesn't want that type of conversation, I'm not going to be very successful. So in terms of meeting where they are, so when I'm talking to someone who is very orange and very meritocratic and sort of like very revenue based, I believe I'll probably explain Agile in terms of how can it help you do those things that you care deeply about. Because I do believe that wherever you are in that culture model, Agile can help you, and it will help you get deeper. And that's just, how do I explain it in a way that will be meaningful to you? And then that's just a way to start the journey. I'm not trying to be disingenuous, I'm just trying to actually relate and communicate well about how these ideas can help you in terms that you value. All right. How do you use Agile in building architecture of a complex system?
I think what's essential when using Agile to build a complex system is to start small. Really, by starting small, you can have your architecture evolve, and you're constructing the architecture that you actually need through its use and the value that you're creating from it, not just doing a lot of large, big upfront thinking about it. How might you expand on that a bit?
In a complex architecture?
Yeah.
I mean, it probably depends on the architecture. I know that we've chosen sort of like an architecture that mirrors sort of our way of thinking, which is, microservices, like decentralized approach to systems, and that lends itself to breaking up systems into smaller pieces that can be worked on by single teams. Now, we do have a monolith, and so working in that type of architecture, trying to figure out where and how to make safe changes in that code base, I think is required like a different sort of structure, like more of a governing and more of like an advice culture. Like, hey, I'm going to work in this component. You know the most about it. How do I do that? And creating what we have domain architects that then come in and help a team that's trying to solve a problem in that space. And that's why we need that, because that was our previous code base.
Yeah, I think really moving to a microservice-based architecture was one of the big innovations for us. We were able to move from a place that we were only doing releases every 4 weeks or so. So we have like a 3-week dev cycle, 1 week freeze, then we'd actually roll that out to production. We have teams at Vistaprint that are releasing multiple times a day. Some are releasing even more frequently than that. And it's because they can really easily not only roll out these changes that they're doing, but easily roll them back. And that's really the place that we're trying to get them to, that rollback is one of the first places you go to when things go wrong.
Tell me about your work week.
So my work week is a little bit different recently. I've been moving into a product owner role for our Agile coaching team. So a lot of my week is understanding the actual needs of the organization itself. So that might involve speaking with our stakeholders, talking with teams, to understand what sort of challenges they're facing, and a lot of actual coaching work. I do some embedded coaching with one particular team who we're trying to work on some flow challenges right now. We do a lot of education work where sometimes a team will ask us, like, oh, we want to do some story mapping. Can you come in and build a session for us? And prepping for events like this to some extent. That's a newer one. How about you? I'm actually very curious if you could maybe tell us a little bit about your delivery lead role as well.
Sure. So I think I kind of like touched on this before, but the way that we structure ourselves, like we are trying to create basically a very matrix organization in terms of like we have functions and we have our vertical teams that we create to pursue strategic outcomes. And so because our hierarchy and our hiring is based around our functions, we also have this role that we're experimenting with called a delivery lead. I mean, maybe you've heard it in some other companies. We're certainly inspired by Riot Games there, where that is the person responsible for creating the system for the work to be done. So like that is a person we hold accountable for making sure that teams that are working together on an outcome like have the right ceremonies, or they have the right feedback loops, or they have the right clarity on what it is that they need to be pursuing. So very much oriented around the outcome and the work, more so than the function. So the work for me, because I'm playing, it is sort of where we are in our transformation, that where we have leaders play multiple roles. I can be at a coaching engagement, I can be facilitating a retrospective, and I might be spending time in one of our rooms playing the delivery lead for one of our strategic outcomes. So that's a little bit different, and I think just a quick moment is that it is a little bit different for every servant leader. That the expectation is you might wear multiple different hats in your tenure, over the course of even the year, because you don't know what's needed exactly. Like I've been a PO for a period of time where I had to manage a small team because that was just help. I could help doing that, and I had enough skills in order to do that. That's how we think about it. It's like, yes, you have a main function, you have a core craft, and you have you have these like abilities that can help the organization. But if you can help in other ways, please do that. All right. What is a good one? What if developers want to try a cool new technology that will slow down value delivery? What would you do, David?
I think in a lot of ways I would probably ask the developers, why does they want to use that cool new technology? If it's solving some sort of problem and helping us accomplish something valuable, I'd probably encourage us to do it, especially if it's going to slow down delivery now and allow us to have better flow moving forward. I suppose beyond that, I think that just learning and picking up new skill sets is naturally important. So I think it would sort of depend on the situations, and I would ask the team what trade-offs that they're making in order to experiment in some of this technology, and what they really hope to gain, even if they think it isn't going to speed them up right now.
Yeah, I think I would look at it I would try to frame it in terms of value, like learning new technologies is value. Education and learning, we want our engineers to be better and to learn new ways of doing things. So there's value to that. So then how do we have a better conversation about why do it now versus later? Because they're both valuable. And the team makes the decision, but I want them to actually think about why should you do this now? Or what is the value of learning this new technology? Is it just because it's cool? Or do you actually believe that it's going to have some application further down the line, like you're exploring it, for the system that you're working on? That's awesome. Like, please do that. But then talk about the timing of it as well. And that's, as long as teams are going into that decision sort of eyes wide open, and they have good feedback loop on if they have made a good decision, that I support them.
So who decided we should adopt Agile, and what was our original goal?
So this is a good one because we just reheard the story again. We did a workshop on Saturday on an introduction to Agile here in Prague, and we had our CEO record a video describing her Agile journey. And this is fresh in my mind. So about in 2014, like someone on her executive team or an advocate came to her, tried to explain to her like why Agile was helpful and why it was interesting. And she thought that was just like a technology thing and doesn't understand how it might help the rest of the business. And over that hour and a half, she was excited enough to learn more. And then she had them come back in and talk to her for about 2 days, trying to understand like what Agile was about, like how it might help our organization. And I think at that time decided to go what she calls all in on Agile. And so we went down that path, and we continue to go down that path. So I would say we had many advocates for methodology or the approach within parts of the business, but really at this point it is the full buy-in of our CEO that allows us to keep going down the journey that we're on.
But the goal I missed or overheard, or
her goal.
She got enthusiastic about it.
Oh yeah. So the goal was ultimately for us is we want to go faster. Like we were feeling real pain of we have ideas and it was taking us a long time to actually get them to our customers. I think the story we like to tell is like if you had an idea for a product that we wanted to launch, it would take you between 1.5 and 2 years to get that into the market. And that was because of how we worked. It was because of how we planned, and we believed that Agile, the promise of Agile, would help us with that, and it's gotten just to the point where we're down to about 45 days for a new product launch, so I think that's why we have a problem. We believe that Agile will help, like we would say for a team or to a company, and if we can articulate that problem, but also set some expectations of like, this is a journey. She definitely was the type of person that wanted the playbook, and said like, how do we just implement this here? And I think we were fortunate enough to get early on really good advice about recognizing that the transformation is hard and it takes time, and and set her expectations and have her commitment to the level that we would be supported on this journey, and that's been the case.
So it was time to market?
I think that that was the initial problem. It was a deep problem for us, and we realized that we as a company were going to struggle if we didn't fix that problem. So it wasn't like existential, but it was painful, and it was one of our main ones at that time.
Okay, so you said it was original goal, the change. Did you redefine the goal of digital transformation afterwards?
Yeah, like I said, the lead time for new product introduction is now 45 days for about 2 years.
I think you can actually answer this next one better than I can. How many products do we currently have, and how many product owners?
So, like, this is a philosophical question that we started with in Vistaprint. So we believe that we use the word product to mean a business card as a product, as well as a flyer, as well as a t-shirt. So like those are products we sell. But I think in traditional software companies, like you were saying, that Microsoft Word is a product or versus Excel, we don't organize that way. We organize more around outcomes. So we will say we have 66 strategic outcomes, and product owners exist within those structures to figure out how it is that we achieve those goals. And so within our organization, actually, I don't know the total number of product owners that work with engineering teams. Maybe that's more of the question, because we have product owners in creative, we have product owners in marketing. So there are product owners in all the other functions. I don't have a good number of how many we have.
Can you give some examples?
Is that?
Can you give some examples? What is this?
Maybe the best thing is like a ratio or something like that. I'd say like the ratio of like product owner to team is probably closer in technology. It's probably closer to 1 to 3. So I'd say it's pretty high. My personal taste, it's pretty high. And I think
one product owner for 3 teams or 3 product owner for 1 team?
one product owner for 3 teams.
Okay.
Yeah. I'd say on average it's a little high, and then in some places it's one product owner to 1 team, but just on average.
So can I give an example of product or outcomes?
We want to.
How broad or narrow are they?
How
broad or narrow are they? For example.
Oh, I see. Yeah. I'd say that they have a domain. So we have some product owners that are very focused on customer experience, and are very good at maybe focused like on the front end experience of a website. We have product owners that are probably more focused on our commerce area, for example, or in our design platform. So they have domains similar to our engineers, like who have maybe general skills, but they have a lot of specific knowledge in a particular domain of the business. That's kind of how we think about it, is that yes, you're very good and you deeply understand this part of the business, and you have relationships with both customers and partners within the organization that will help you understand what the problem is, and that will make you a successful product owner. But if it were true that your area didn't have the value, I don't know, we're not investing in this area now, you can help in other ways, and maybe you can be a little bit T-shaped and step out of your comfort zone of your domain and work on something else. So like we talk about T-shaped people on teams. So for engineers, we expect T-shapes in all of the roles, and we try to do that. All right, David. What was the biggest mistake in your Agile career?
I think one of the biggest mistakes was trying to fool myself into thinking I could do education for all of our Mumbai office all by myself. I was pretty much working like 19, 20-hour days for 1 week. That was a mistake. Just trying to do way too much by myself, not asking for help, completely ignoring all of my values.
I think for me, it's just, I remember this phone call very distinctly. My manager at the time said, "Hey, Daryl, can you come down to the 4th floor?" I was like, "Sure." Come down to this conference room. And he's like, and he just walks me over to this this team that we had. He's like, "Here's your new Agile coach." I should have mentioned that call. But what ended up being my biggest mistake was accepting that coaching engagement, where I'm trying to be this coach for this team I had very little context to, and it was in a part of the business that was very much like a startup, and so they were under extreme pressure. They weren't interested in coaching, so they weren't necessarily interested in having me there. I did not help them. I was not successful in doing that. I think I knew that, and I think I could have been a lot better about showing that this was not going to be time well spent for them or for me. But I went along with that because I don't know. I couldn't figure out how to say no in that situation. But I think it definitely was a bad decision for everyone that happened. So
I'd like to refine my answer there. I'd actually say my biggest continued mistake that I keep making is giving people exactly what they have asked me for. That is the biggest mistake you can make as a coach. Because it's just so easy to be like, "Oh, you want to be training Kanban? Sure, I've got tons of education made for that. Let me just show up and give it to you." Or what I should really be asking is, like, trying to learn a bit more. It's like, "Oh, that's very interesting. Why do you want to know about this thing? Why do you think you need this particular tool or process, or why do you want to learn about something?" But yeah, I think that's a mistake that I make all the time. It's a mistake I'm still going to keep making, and it's a hard one to avoid. So how do you help teams/management understand that Agile is first and foremost a mindset rather than a tool?
So we have an approach to this. We like to show we like to get someone to understand. I think people to understand what a value is. I feel like David touched a little bit on this earlier. In the culture model, there's the visible things that you see, which are processes, roles, actions, the results of those actions, and then what's invisible are the beliefs and the values and the experiences that led you to take those actions. And I think sharing that model and then demonstrating that, we have some exercises that show if you believe this, you act a different way this way, and then we show them how to act, and if we give them other beliefs, and then they realize that they act in different ways. And that it's by touching those beliefs that you can really touch a system very deeply, or a group of people very deeply. And I think it demonstrates, pretty quickly, what the value of a belief is, but also recognizing that you can't, but then having the conversation, you can't force any person to believe anything that they don't want to believe. So then how do you go about that transformation and that journey? So recognizing what a value is and what it causes in terms of things you see, and then setting the stage for that belief is a very personal thing, and that is our challenge. All right. How do you promote Agile in an organization where the management is very waterfall-ish?
I think, much like we sort of shared before, a lot of it is meeting the management where they are, trying to understand the perspectives that they're taking, the goals that they're trying to achieve, and help them see that they can potentially get those things and more through an Agile approach. I think the vast majority of people are really taking a logical approach to the way they live their lives. I think people are trying to pick things because they think it'll actually make them happier. People don't actively make bad decisions and say, "Yes, I want to stick my hand in the garbage disposal." So yeah, meeting people where they are, helping them understand what they might get out of adopting these values.
All right, I'll ask myself this question. How many teams does a coach typically support? So the way that coaching works in our organization is that coaches can come in, we are sort of centralized. So there are coaches in technology, there are coaches in marketing, there are coaches that are more in across like the business, we call it the transformation coaching team. And so, at least I will say in technology where we are, it's less about the ratio of the number of coaches, but I'll say right now it's probably like one coach to, I don't know, something around 5 to or more teams. Do that.
Yeah, like 6 or 7.
But our model for coaching isn't that because what we really want is for teams to not need us. Like our job as coaches, is for teams to self-sustain like their own agile transformation. That's the goal that we have. And so we see it as how can we get in and help them where they are, help them be a little bit better, help them sustain that change, and then help them figure out, how to know when they might need, another coaching engagement. So we spend some targeted time with teams, like either for say 4 to 8 weeks. The engagement kind of varies. We work on something very specific. We try to get them to a point where they're self-sustaining, whatever it is they want to be better at, and then let them know that we're still there to help them whenever they're ready for more coaching or they feel like we could help more.
And that phrase around self-sustaining, I think it's really important that it's not just teams are self-sustaining, but the agile transformation itself. And one of the ways that you can actually create that sort of self-sustainment is for your teams that really are performing well, that they are using the values and principles to really be the best they're able to do. To have those teams evangelize the things that they're doing, and not just the things that went fantastically well, to also have them share like, hey, we tried something and it didn't go very well. This is what we learned along the way. That's what actually creates a learning-based organization that is willing to keep following this path down and improve themselves without having someone else come in and say, okay, now it's your turn to inspect and adapt. Now it's your turn to inspect and adapt. They just recognize it.
All right, David. How long does it take, on average, in your observations, your experience, to properly convert a waterfall-oriented company to an agile-oriented company? How long did it take us, for example?
I would say we're still doing it in a lot of ways. I think that Agile really is a journey. It's something that you have to keep moving with and getting better at. I think our technology side of the organization, that's what, a 3-year transformation right now?
How far are we for transformation?
For the tech side.
6 or 7 years?
Is there another one?
Yes, we were before the enterprise.
Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah, so maybe like 3 to 4 years for our tech side to get pretty good at what we were doing, and say the rest of the org is still moving in that direction. I think we still have work to do.
I'd say my best advice, and I'll quote Michael Soto here, who says the leader is the limit. So the speed at which you're going to adopt this is going to be based on how much change your organization is willing to adopt, and like how much leadership support you're getting in that change, how fast they want to go. I think honestly, like if I look back at Vistaprint, like we tore apart our program management organization pretty fast, and you probably didn't replace it as fast as we should have, kind of thing. Like we figured that out. It's like that I think in any system that's going to change, like there's often like a pendulum swing from very strong to one area and another to this way, and there's like an oscillation as you try to find like whatever your new local maxima is. And so I think that's pretty natural, but the rate at which that's going to happen is going to be very dependent on, I think, the highest leader who is for that organization, their tolerance for change. So that's not the best way. That's kind of the best way to say it depends, but hopefully give you some sense of what it depends on, and maybe where to spend your energy if you're in an organization that's trying to transform. I think early on, getting the support at the highest levels will help you go faster.
I think we answered a similar question to this one before. Was there something more in depth that maybe this person wanted to get at? No?
All right, I think we answered all the questions that people submitted. Is there one more?
No one asked me if I wanted to fight one horse-sized duck or 100 duck-sized horses. I'm very disappointed. And thought about it for weeks.
And what's your answer?
Definitely 100 duck-sized horses. You can just kick those things out of the way.
That's a terrible answer.
Ducks are mean. Have you seen a duck?
Have you ever fought
To have a giant duck? Don't want to deal with that.
We can go after the Gulliver. Let's see. Have you tried to calculate how much time every team member spends on Agile ceremonies? Yes.
Yeah.
Because teams ask, and they want to know. Like, we seem to be spending a lot of time on meetings, and I think that comes up again and again, and so we calculate that because people ask. I think the biggest question, my best answer for that is like, what I'm wrong about is that if people are asking that question, my belief is that they're having really bad ceremonies. They're just not useful. Like, if they're not getting some value out of this ceremony, or they don't understand why it helps, then I'm probably doing a bad job facilitating that, or creating sort of an education to understand like why a stand-up is useful, or what a good stand-up looks like, or why it is useful to you. Like, I don't want to have ceremonies for ceremony's sake. Again, ceremonies are tools that support us, trying to collaborate, trying to learn from each other, trying to do the work. And so if that's not actually happening in those ceremonies, like outcomes of those ceremonies aren't being met, and we're not being really clear on what those outcomes are, and are we actually hitting those outcomes and holding it, because it's hard. It is hard to have a good ceremony. And it degrades over time. Like, if you don't kind of look at it, you get bad hygiene, and people just go on and on. For example, in a stand-up or something like that, things are going to degrade, and you forget why am I doing this again? Like, I just kind of show up. But I think if you get really clear about the purpose and what we all hope to get out of this, then I think that's what the signal is to me when I get these questions. I always calculate it, and I always ask them whether they're getting value out of it, and then I say, well, this is what I think these ceremonies are for. Are you doing that another way? Because if you are doing it another way, then fine. Like, don't do the ceremony. Like, I'm not here to create ceremonies for you. Like, or I don't feel it's really important. It's just like, are you getting the outcome of the daily plan or the daily stand-up? Are you getting that context, learning what you need to do, not having attendance removed and raised at a regular cadence? Like, those are things that I care about. And if that's happening, great. But I really do think the daily stand-up is a great way to achieve that. But maybe your team is doing it a different way, because like, you're always on Slack, for example, and like the information is just so free-flowing. Like, there could be a context where that could be true, or I don't know. I can imagine different situations where a team is getting what they need in different ways.
I've also experienced the time when ceremonies happen to also be a big impact in whether people are getting value out of these ceremonies. If you have lots of gaps in between, or they're at some sort of time that's just very inopportune for the team, maybe it's like after lunch or in between two other meetings, it can be hard to get back to work with just all the context switching. It takes something like half an hour to be able to get back to where you were once you have to do a context switch. So I think that's another point that's important to consider as well.
All right, David, how do you distinguish if Agile is used as a cargo call? How do you understand that it's not used in the right way?
So I think the thing that has been my go-to question is to just ask people why they're doing a ceremony at all. So if you go to a stand-up, it's like, oh, well, we give the stand-up for Madison because it's just a status update for her, and Madison isn't here today, so we're just going to skip stand-up. It's like, oh, that's very interesting. Do you ever come up with plans? Like, yeah, but we don't really follow it anyway. It's just for Madison to look at. And all this stuff is wrong. If your team doesn't know why they are doing things, help guide them along the way. Help them figure out the type of value that they could be getting, or even ask them, like, what are you trying to get out of this ceremony anyway? What are you hoping to accomplish?
I do think I also agree that is the best test. Ask someone why, and see what the answer is. So, like, if the answer is why is because we should, or because some reason around more process, or that, and it ends there, then maybe you're more you're doing it because you're supposed to do it, and less deeply that it's based on values. All right. Any other questions that you want to ask? Well, thank you very much for joining us today. I really enjoyed the questions. Please join us for some drinks afterwards, and we'll be around to chat as well.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.